Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to take some big, sometimes complicated ideas, especially from Christian theology, and, well, make them really clear and insightful for you. Whether you're maybe just starting out, exploring faith, or you've been around a while, we want these deep dives to be genuinely helpful. So let's jump right in today. When you hear the word sacrifice, especially in a biblical or Christian context, what picture comes into your head? We use that word all the time, don't we? Like, oh, I'm sacrificing my weekend, or we talk about Jesus' sacrifice. But is that everyday meaning really what the Bible has in mind with all those ancient offerings?
That's such a good starting point.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, you've hit on something that trips a lot of people up. It's easy to misunderstand. Today, we're going to unpack this by looking at some really fascinating insights from a source called Zebah, the Feast of Covenant Communion, particularly chapter 3. And what we'll find is this very specific Hebrew word, Zebah. It's often just translated as sacrifice, but that misses so much. Getting clear on this one word, Zebah, honestly, it's going to light up Christian theology for you, especially how you see Christ's work.
Wow, okay. One word can do all that. Sounds intriguing. So maybe set the stage for us a bit. Remind us about the basics of that ancient system, the Levite system in the Old Testament.
Sure. So you can think of it as having two main pillars, or maybe symbolic anchors. There's blood, the Hebrew word is dezem, and there's fire, which is esh.
Blood and fire. Sounds pretty intense.
It does, but it's crucial to see they weren't like primitive or barbaric elements. No, they were symbols, really powerful symbols, pointing to the covenant relationship God set up with his people.
Okay, so not just random elements, but symbols of relationship.
Exactly. Take the blood of the covenant, that's Dezem Hembered, from Exodus 24. That wasn't God demanding a payment, because he was angry. Not at all. It was about creating a shared life, a deep connection, literally binding God, Yahweh, and his people together.
Okay, so blood means unity, shared life. What about the fire, like in Leviticus 9?
Right. That fire wasn't about judgment or wrath either in that context. It was God's way of showing acceptance. It was like God saying, yes, I accept this offering. I want to be with you. Hambo. God consuming the offering in fire was this visible sign that communion was possible, that the relationship was good.
Got it. So within that relationship, maintained by blood and fire, there were different rituals, different offerings, things like Asham, Jatat, Shalom, and Olah.
Yep, those were maintenance rights, ways to keep the covenant relationship healthy, deal with unintentional slip-ups, that kind of thing. They operated within the established covenant.
But then there's the crisis point, right? What about when someone didn't just slip up, but deliberately rebelled? The Bible calls it sinning with a high hand, viogrameta, like high treason against God.
And King David is the classic, heartbreaking example after his affair with Bathsheba and murdering her husband. You hear his pain in Psalm 51, verse 16. He cries out, "For you do not desire sacrifice, Zebah, or I would give it. You do not delight in burnt offering, Olah."
Ah, okay, so he mentions those two specific words.
Exactly. David, even in his brokenness, had this deep theological understanding. He knew his actions, his deliberate treason, put him completely outside the normal system. The usual offerings just couldn't fix this. And his choice of Zebah and Olah right there, that's our key for today's deep dive.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Why Zebah and Olah? What did he mean? And how does this point to a bigger misunderstanding we often have? It seems like we tend to just flatten everything, call all those ancient rituals sacrifice. But you're saying that actually hides the meaning.
That's precisely it. It makes things seem simpler, maybe, but we lose the richness, the specific jobs each offering did, and surprisingly, it can even make it harder to see the full scope of what Christ accomplished. So our mission today is really clear, to show you that not everything labeled sacrifice is the same. We're digging into this one Hebrew term, Zebah, that's spelled Z-E-B-A-H, or in Hebrew, and we're going to argue, based on the source, that it has a very precise meaning. It refers specifically to the peace offering, or the well-being offering, the shalom. And here's the main point, the really big idea. Zebah was fundamentally a communion meal, a shared feast, celebrated right there, close to God.
A communion meal. Okay, that sounds very different already. And why is getting this distinction so important for someone listening, maybe someone newer to these ideas?
It's huge. Because once you see what Zebah really was and how different it was from, say, the Ar or the Sitta, suddenly David's cry makes perfect sense. And even more crucially, it lays a crystal clear foundation for understanding Jesus' work. Plus, it brings fresh life and meaning to something we do all the time as Christians, the Lord's Supper.
So this isn't just like a dusty old word study. It's digging for theological treasure.
Exactly. Think about the Hebrew liturgical system. That's just a fancy way of saying their practices of worship. It was incredibly detailed, incredibly precise. Every offering had its own name, its own purpose, its own set of instructions, like a spiritual grammar. If we ignore those distinctions, it's like, well, it's like listening to a piece of music, but only hearing noise because you don't understand the notes or the rhythm. You miss the actual music.
And Zebah is a prime example of where we've maybe lost some of that musicality, that specific meaning.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It gets lumped into sacrifice, and we lose its unique melody. Careful scholarship shows the root of Zebah isn't just about killing an animal. It's about killing an animal specifically for a meal.
For a meal. Okay, that's the key.
That's the absolute key. And so the term Zebah applies almost exclusively to that peace or well-being offering, the Zebah Shalaman. And what made that offering totally unique?
You said it was a shared meal.
Yes. It was the only ritual where all three parties, God, the priest, and the person offering with their family, all shared in the meal.
You know, when I first really got that, it was kind of mind-blowing. It changes the whole feeling from something somber to something joyful.
Totally joyful.
Yeah.
Picture it. An Israelite comes to the tabernacle area, the holy space. They're not necessarily feeling crushed by guilt. Maybe they're overflowing with gratitude, or they're fulfilling a promise they made to God, or they just want to celebrate the shalom, the peace, the wholeness they have because they belong to God's people. So the animal is presented. A specific part, the fat portion, seen as the best part, is burned on the altar. That's God's portion, accepted in that divine fire we talked about, symbolizing God's pleasure.
Okay, God gets his share.
Right. The priest gets his designated share too. But then, and this is the amazing part, the rest of the meat is given back to the worshiper.
They get it back.
Yes. To cook and eat right there in the sacred area, having a joyful feast with their family and friends.
Wow. So Zebah is fundamentally a feast with God. It's communion made tangible, edible even. It's not merely about sin, but about connection, celebration, enjoyment.
You've got it. It's like reliving that moment back at Mount Sinai in Exodus 24, after the covenant was made. The leaders of Israel saw God and ate and drank. The Zebah meal was a regular reminder and affirmation. Our relationship with God is intact, and that's reason to celebrate together. The fact that the worshiper ate the meat is the absolute defining feature, according to scholars. It was all about enjoying communion.
That is such a different picture than just sacrifice. Okay, so to really cement this, let's contrast Zebah with those other main offerings. You said each had a totally different job, right? Especially for someone new to this, seeing the contrast helps.
Exactly. Let's make it super clear. First up, the Theo, often called the sin offering.
Okay.
But a better translation really is purification offering. Its main job wasn't primarily about forgiving someone's personal guilt, like saying sorry for breaking a rule. It was about cleansing the sanctuary, the holy space itself.
Cleansing the space. Why did the space need cleaning?
Good question. In their understanding, things like unintentional sins or even just natural bodily impurities created a kind of spiritual contamination, a pollution. And this pollution could defile God's dwelling place, potentially making it unfit for his holy presence.
Ah, okay. So sin makes the place dirty, spiritually speaking.
Right. And the set acted like a spiritual detergent. The blood from this offering was carefully manipulated, maybe dabbed on the altar horns or sprinkled in the holy place to cleanse away that contamination.
So it's like restoring the holiness of the worship space.
Precisely. And here's the crucial difference from Zia. The person bringing the offering never ate any of it. It wasn't a meal. It was a solemn act of decontamination to preserve the relationship, not a party. That's why it's never, ever called Zebah. Totally different purpose.
Makes sense. Okay, what's next?
Second, the sum, often called the guilt offering, but better understood as a restitution offering.
Restitution, like paying something back.
Exactly. This was required when someone had violated holy things or, importantly, when they had wronged their neighbor, maybe through fraud, theft, or deception. The logic was clear. You had to fix the horizontal relationship, the one with your neighbor, before the vertical one with God could be fully right. The person had to restore what was lost, plus a penalty, usually 1/5 extra.
So it's about justice and repair between people first.
Yes, repairing the damage done and restoring integrity. Again, the focus is reparation, not celebration. The offerer didn't eat, so definitely not a Zebah.
Okay, purification, restitution. What was the third main one? You mentioned David used two terms.
Right. The other one David mentioned was the Yola, the ascension offering.
Often called the burnt offering.
That's the common name, yeah. But the Hebrew root means to ascend. And this offering represented total devotion, complete surrender to God.
Total surrender. How is it different from the Zebah meal then?
Radically different. With the juff, the entire animal, every single part except the hide, which went to the priest, was consumed by the fire on the altar. All of it went up in smoke, ascending to God as a pleasing aroma.
The whole thing, nothing for the person offering.
Nothing. It all went to God. It was the ultimate act of saying, everything I am, everything I have, belongs to you. The worshiper identified with that animal being completely given over.
So if I'm putting this together simply, Zebah is sharing a meal with God, Zah is giving everything to God.
Beautifully put. The juff wasn't about communion in the sense of sharing. It was about consecration, total dedication. It was often seen as a climax of worship, something you did when your relationship was already right with God, already purified. So again, never called Zebah. One's a shared feast, the other's total surrender. Two very different expressions of faith.
Okay, wow. Having those distinctions, meal, purification, restitution, total surrender. Let's go back to David in Psalm 51. His words sound incredibly precise now.
Don't they? His theology was spot on, even in his despair. Think about it. He'd committed adultery and murder. He'd betrayed his covenant with God in the most profound way. How could he possibly sit down and share a Zebah, a communion meal, with the God he'd so grievously offended? Fellowship was shattered.
Impossible. The meal signifies a relationship that's intact.
Exactly. And how could he offer an olah, an offering of total surrender, when his heart was clearly divided, rebellious, and full of deceit? He couldn't honestly say, all to you, God, at that moment.
He wasn't in a place for either celebration or total dedication.
Right. He knew these rituals worked within a functioning covenant relationship. He'd broken that relationship so badly with his high-handed sin that the normal system couldn't fix it. His only hope was something beyond the ritual's pure, unmerited, sovereign grace from God. He needed a new beginning.
This is really clarifying. But it naturally leads to the big question for us. How does all this precision about Zebah or Zah help us understand Jesus and our Christian life? Because we often just use that one word, sacrifice, for everything Jesus did. Are we maybe missing something important by doing that, like creating a theological mashup that doesn't quite fit?
That's a really insightful question, and yes, I think we risk doing exactly that.
Yeah.
If we just collapse everything into Jesus as our sacrifice, we might unintentionally create something like the Zebah purification offering that's also a communion meal, which, as we've seen, is sort of like mixing oil and water in the biblical system. They had distinct functions. Christ's work is absolutely vast. It fulfills and transcends all these ancient types, but it does so in specific ways at specific points in his work. Understanding the distinctions helps us appreciate the fullness of what he did.
Okay, so let's break that down. How does Christ's work connect to these different types, especially for someone trying to grasp the basics?
Let's start with the cross. How does it relate to Zebah? Well, remember, the Old Testament story shows, sadly, that Israel repeatedly struggled to keep the covenant. Human hearts were the weak link. That's why prophets like Jeremiah look forward to a new covenant, one based on God changing hearts and offering radical forgiveness. Now, foundational covenants are always sealed with blood, symbolizing life laid down to establish the bond. So when Jesus at the Last Supper holds up the cup and says, "This is my blood of the new covenant."
He's explicitly linking his death to covenant inauguration.
Precisely. He's identifying his death as the foundational act, the inaugural Zebah that seals this new covenant relationship between God and humanity. It's like Moses sprinkling the blood back in Exodus 24, but infinitely greater.
So the cross isn't primarily the purification act, the Eid. It's the covenant-making meal starter, the Zebah.
In its foundational role, yes. It's the act that establishes the communion, the relationship. And think about the divine fire, God's acceptance. What's the new covenant equivalent? Jesus' resurrection. That's the Father's ultimate yes. The heavenly fire signifying acceptance of Jesus' offering and the permanent inauguration of the new covenant.
Okay, the cross establishes the communion, the Zebah. Where does the purification, the Ida part, come in then?
Yeah.
Because we definitely need cleansing.
Great question. That comes primarily through Christ's heavenly ministry. The book of Hebrews is key here. It says the old day rituals were just shadows. After his resurrection and ascension, Hebrews says Christ entered heaven itself to appear now for us in God's presence. As our high priest, he's continually in the true Holy of Holies, and he entered not with animal blood, but by his own blood, meaning in the power and merit of his own perfected eternal life.
So his presence in heaven is doing the purifying.
Yes, his ongoing, living, glorified presence before the Father is the definitive see. It purifies the heavenly realities themselves, but crucially for us, Hebrews says it cleanses our consciences from acts that lead to death. This is the deep, internal cleansing the old system couldn't provide, even for those high-handed sins. It's his current, active ministry that keeps us clean.
Wow, okay. Cross is the foundational Zebah establishing communion. Heavenly ministry is the ongoing Abba providing purification. So then, what is the Lord's Supper? Where does that fit in this clearer picture?
Now the Lord's Supper really lights up, doesn't it? If the cross is the beginning Zebah and heaven is where the Ava happens, then the Lord's Supper is our regular, ongoing participation in the communion Zebah of the New Covenant.
So it's like we're continually participating in that covenant meal Jesus started.
Exactly. It's not a new sacrifice. Yeah. Hebrews 10 makes that absolutely clear. Christ's sacrifice was once for all time. No, the Lord's Supper is a communion meal, a feast where we remember and actively participate in the reality of the covenant secured by his blood. When we eat the bread and drink the cup, we're doing the new covenant equivalent of the Zebah Shalom. We're celebrating the shalom, the peace and wholeness we have with God because of Jesus' finished work.
So it should be primarily joyful, a celebration.
Yes, a moment of profound joy, thanksgiving, remembering what he did, affirming our connection to him and to each other in his body. We proclaim the Lord's death until he comes, looking forward to the ultimate feast, the marriage supper of the Lamb, the final eternal Zebah. It's eating in God's presence, rejoicing in the relationship he made possible.
That's such a powerful reframing. Okay, let's quickly recap the main takeaway then. Zebah isn't just sacrifice.
No, it's specifically a celebratory communion meal.
Yeah.
And seeing how distinct it is from purification, restitution, and total surrender is absolutely crucial.
And this clarity shows us Christ's work in its full beauty.
It really does. He's not just generically our sacrifice. He's the inaugural Zebah whose death and resurrection founded the new covenant. He's the definitive KO whose heavenly presence continually purifies us. And he's the perfect Shirah whose entire life was an offering of complete devotion to the Father. He fulfills it all.
And for you listening, maybe new to all this, why does this ancient Hebrew word matter today?
Because it frees us. It frees us from thinking our relationship with God is just about sin management, just a legal transaction. It opens the door to realizing that relationship is also meant to be enjoyed. It invites us into joy, gratitude, and celebrating God's presence, the very essence of the Zebah meal.
And it transforms how we see the Lord's Supper.
Absolutely. It confirms it's a feast of communion, not a funeral of reatonement. The amazing lesson from Zebah is that Christianity isn't only about the purification that gets us into God's presence. It's fundamentally, gloriously about the meal we get to share once we're there.
So here's a final thought to chew on. Maybe the ultimate point of all the blood and fire wasn't just forgiveness. Maybe the ultimate goal was always the feast. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. We really hope exploring Zebah has been as illuminating for you as it has been for us. Keep exploring these wonderful truths. Welcome to the deep dive. We're here